everybody. Thanks for coming to the session. I think that is... I guess I'm not going over there. Can everybody hear me okay if I just talk?
Yeah.
Maybe is it okay if I just talk? Oh, we got the microphone. Okay, great. So my name is Jonathan DeVilliers. I'm an analyst at Navigant Research within our global energy practice. I lead our research efforts into blockchain applications in the energy industry. And I'm really happy to introduce this panel up here today. We've actually got an awesome representation of the different industries that are using blockchain, and I know there are many folks out there who really want to know what is blockchain being used for, how do I put this stuff in action, and what have other people who have actually tried this technology learned from it. So hopefully we'll be able to cover some of that today. I'm going to start out by just asking everybody up on the stage to introduce themselves, and we'll get underway.
Thank you, Jonathan. Hi. I'm Jay Koch. I'm part of Anheuser-Busch InBev. I run a lot of the technology strategy, and part of that blockchain has been some fun stuff that we have done. Happy to share some of the things we have done and how we have done it. Before that, I was at companies like Amazon, Oracle, and Intel, primarily in product management and engineering management.
Hey, my name is Adam Kremble. I'm the Director of Business Development for Blockwatch. We are a blockchain monitoring and management platform. My expertise really comes in the post-production when you've gone live with blockchain. So the things to think about right before you go live to what you need afterwards.
Good afternoon. This on? Good. Good afternoon. Robert Renscher with the Boeing Company. We're an aerospace company, right? Do a few different things out there. So, anyways, senior systems engineer. Been with Boeing for a little over 3 decades now, and look forward to the conversation we're going to have. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. I'm Mihai Vasco. I'm the CEO of Modex. We're a blockchain database company. We want to simplify blockchain adoption by offering companies a very interesting middleware that they can use and, be on blockchain directly on a private network in less than 2 days. So we want to simplify the blockchain adoption by empowering CTOs with a good technology.
Great, thanks guys. So I think that it kind of makes sense to start at the beginning when you're thinking about implementing a pilot. And one of the questions that I wanted to ask up here on the stage was, what are the ingredients, what are all the ducks that you need to get into a row before you actually try to launch a pilot or proof of concept? And Jay, I was hoping you could maybe speak to that.
Sure. So I think it's no different than running any good pilots, right? You have to have the right business case, the problems, the stakeholders, the right technology partners, right? I don't think it's any different for blockchain compared to any other pilots that we have done. What I would say was a little bit different 2 years back was, or maybe 2 to 3 years back, when blockchain was really exciting, we could engage different parts of a business on very difficult problems that maybe not a lot of people wanted to engage in. But what had happened over a period of time, that we just got inundated with blockchain projects from vendors. And right now I would say if I bring up a technology project, I'm less likely to say it's about blockchain. So that's what has changed, right? 2 years back, it was completely different. It was very exciting, very easy to engage audiences in. Now it's kind of gone into a little bit of reverse mode.
Great. So,
and I'm hoping that many of the folks here will talk about how we can maybe engage in stuff that's, again, exciting, but doesn't become kind of overhyped to a lot of our audiences.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, got caught up in the hype phase of it and just thought, oh my gosh, okay, we need blockchain, everything's going to be blockchain. And I think a lot of it is the pre-planning, like you said. It's no different from any other technology. But I think the 2 other factors that really drove into it is does blockchain make sense for my use case? Not every single use case is going to make sense for blockchain. It's just not going to make sense for it. And the second piece of it is, does private chain or is public chain going to be the direction that makes sense for my business use case? And I think those 2 things are really important to get squared away before you start going down the path. Once you go down the path, pivoting is possible, but that's expensive and time consuming. So I'd like to say, make sure you're doing your due diligence in the very beginning. Don't think about just bringing it up to pilot, proof of concept, even into production. You have to think about what happens after production as well. if you want your implementation to be a success.
Yeah, due diligence I think is a great keyword. We've done some of that with our clients, and it really, you have to start with your business problem. You work backwards to the technology that you need to solve that problem. And if that's blockchain, great. If it's not, great. But make sure you're going through that flow chart in the right direction. Can anyone on stage speak to, has anyone been involved in due diligence, or can talk a little bit about what that screening process is like, whether it's the screening process that ultimately gets you to blockchain technology, or the screening process that comes from having a surplus of vendors pitching different projects at you? How do you identify which ones you're going to go with?
So we, at the Boeing Company, we began looking at blockchain about 4 years ago. We had we were looking for a solution to a problem and came across blockchain as a potential solution to our problem that was unrelated to the purpose of blockchain, which is kind of ironic. One of the initial things we ran into is what I call the fear factor of new technology. And people would often label you as a technology looking for a problem. And we're saying, no, you have a problem. This technology might help you. And so it's kind of interesting. But then you also, once you get past that initial fear that you've got a technology you're just trying to play with, you get into the situation where we're already doing that. And rationale that starts to happen is, well, why do we need blockchain when we have distributed database technology today? What's the differentiating factor about blockchain? So you have this initial resistance or anti-advocacy that it starts to occur. We call it sometimes the immune system starts kicking in and starts trying to chew you away from your ideology of using this technology. So what we have found is that you have to have a clear understanding of the business opportunity that the technology is going to assist either in improving the process or creating value, either in reduction of costs or promoting additional revenue opportunities with the use of the technology. So you've got to have and that goes into support later on when the business says, what's the return on my investment of adopting and utilizing this technology? We started looking at blockchain technology from a function of, is this technology viable? So we didn't bring a use case or business case. We wanted to validate the capabilities of the technology from a technical maturity and functionality perspective, because we were getting sold a lot of concepts. You can do this with blockchain technology. So we had to evaluate the capability of the technology, understand its maturity, and then isolate through a decision tree that we put together of where the efficacy of the technology would be utilized in the Boeing Company and in the aerospace industry, because blockchain is not at least from our perspective, is not an in-house solution. It is a solution that needs to be deployed within an ecosystem in order for it to realize its full value. So those are some of the early on things that we learned in going after blockchain. So.
Yeah, this is a great transition into my next question, because one of the ingredients, and I think one of the themes we're hearing a lot this year, is the need for collaborators and other stakeholders in this ecosystem to get the most out of blockchain technology. And I'm just wondering if you have thoughts on how you get those stakeholders involved. How do you convince them the business case is there if you're more familiar than technology than they are, or if they have, as we were talking about before the panel, issues with thinking they're going to be giving away all of their proprietary data, their operational information that they want to keep close to the chest. How do you build that ecosystem?
Yeah, I think before we go there, what I would say is, as part of the due diligence process, that's when you start understanding whether you have the right partners, right? And what I've seen in many cases is, it wasn't the technology which caused the problem. It was that we either didn't have the right business case, or we didn't have the right partners to begin with, that they were bringing in the right set of expertise, or they had the value proposition even for themselves to be in place. So I think it starts with that due diligence process to understand if you are going to go out into the ecosystem, whether all their value propositions for everybody is aligned in the same direction. If not, after a while, there was a lot of bifurcations in some of the initiatives that we went into, and it just got split because different parties had different kind of ideas of what they thought going to come out of this effort. And it was never the technology that was kind of the bottleneck in any of the scenarios that I've seen. Other thoughts?
Yeah, and thinking about that, what we're really talking about there is change management. How do we really get that started? And that's never going to be an easy concept, whether it's in blockchain, whether it's in industry, whether it's in anything. So you really have to be asking those right kind of questions, and you have to, like you said, identifying those use cases where this makes sense, and you know, not to sound cliche to say this is for the greater good, but those kind of use cases, for example, like things in you know, trust your supplier that I know that they're doing, or food trust. We're thinking about ways that people can collaborate for an idea that's greater good, whether that's reducing friction, whether that's increasing trust. Those are ideas people can get behind that may not show up on your ledger at the end of the day, and that might be the ROI statement that a lot of people immediately want to go for. But we talk about those concepts of trust or increased visibility or reducing friction in a process. Those things people can really start to get behind. And when you find those right people, because not everybody is going to go for it, but when you find those right people, that's when you have support, that's when you can start to create an ecosystem, and that's when you can really start to drive change.
That's an interesting approach. We see that with some of our customers when they look to kind of like partner and create those kind of ecosystems, but most of the times we look at blockchain, applied blockchain technologies as a really good technology that could solve some really painful problems, but we don't need to be part of a consortium necessarily. For example, like hospitals. People are dying today in US hospitals because they are subject to ransomware attacks. When you have a ransomware attack in your hospital, the database is completely blocked. So in those hours, not that you pay ransom and you have to kind of like find a solution extremely fast, but people are really dying because they don't have access to the database of the hospital. So this is where we kind of like focus it within Modex, our applied blockchain technology, where we want to empower all of those CTOs that don't have millions to spend on fancy protocols or consortiums. They just want something extremely simple and reliable that can solve the real problem. They just want to take the node out of the system and restore it from a private network so that they don't pay ransom and they have their network up and running immediately. So there's the consortium and the collaboration side, but there's also the really applied blockchain, private blockchain technology that can solve a lot of painful problems today.
Sure. Yeah, and yeah, this is a great example where one of those stakeholders that you have to consider is who your end user is and who your customers are. You need to get them on board also. And speaking from a vendor perspective, as someone who's providing those services to companies, can you talk a little bit about that? We were talking about, you know, presenting your users with a package solution that's kind of plug and play that they can install very easily and cheaply. Are there any other kinds of, again, key ingredients for what can minimize those barriers to people actually coming into your ecosystem using your services?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're looking at blockchain today as it's a very fancy, hard to find and expensive vitamin where we should actually transform it into affordable aspirin. So this is where we are with the adoption phase of blockchain at the enterprise level. We want to educate and we want to make it available so that people don't feel at risk when they're experimenting at the technology. Well, within Modex, we just want to take out the blockchain concept out of the discussion. We want to make it invisible because this is about the outcomes, it's not about the technology. Like all the other technologies, we don't care how they work in the back end, we just care about all the advantages that are out there. So I think what we should all do is to push this into the aspirin approach.
Yeah, I think I really like that kind of analogy, right? Where we had the biggest success was in a lot of farmers in underbanked or unbanked communities supply produce to us. And what we found that many of them, even though they're dealing with one of the biggest companies in the world, those interactions don't generate any benefit for them outside of those interactions because they're never tracked, they're never exposed. So what we started working with a startup which takes those interactions and puts them in a ledger and makes all of those transactions very easy to do through mobile phone so that at the end of the day, once we can have enough of those, and that company can go and partner with banks. All of those transactions are visible, that these are suppliers. They're marginalized farmers, but they're suppliers to one of the biggest companies in the world. And hopefully that they can now get access to credit and other facilities that they don't have access to. So this was like a very simple use case where we didn't really have to convince anybody, but has got really big social benefit, which this company really cares about.
Great. Yeah, I want to transition into talking about some of these pilots. I know among your companies you've participated in a lot of different POCs and pilots. It would be great to hear a little bit about those and some of the lessons learned. Really quickly though, I just wanted to poll the audience. Could I just see a show of hands for anyone who works at a company that has participated in a blockchain POC or a pilot? Okay, great. And of those people, can you put your hands back up again if you've decided that there's some there, and it's a technology that you want to keep investigating? Okay, interesting. So that's like probably a little more than half the hands. Fascinating. Okay, so maybe let's just go down the line. I would love to hear from each of you, if I could, just one example of a pilot or POC that you've been involved in that you thought was particularly interesting, and then maybe one key takeaway or outcome from that pilot that you think the audience might benefit from.
Yeah, so I already talked about the one that was, I would say, the most impactful for us. It's already live in a number of countries in Africa, and it's part of our what we call Sustainability Accelerator program that we've been sponsoring worldwide. So we want to take this concept that we have seen working in a couple of countries and take it to all the areas where we operate in, and we operate in almost 150 countries across the world. Where this is a solution that can easily scale. And we see a lot of good that can come out of it by bringing people who have, I would say, as I said, are more marginalized in the current financial ecosystem to be part of the banking ecosystem. There are a lot of other projects that we have done, definitely on the food supply chain, and I think cross-border commerce, where we want to bring in more visibility and transparency. I would say those are much more slower moving because they need buy-in from the ecosystem and a lot of different partners, where there are more challenges on aligning interests and aligning the right kind of incentives for it to work. There was a very fun thing that we did at a conference where we had a vending machine that dispensed beer, but since it's alcohol, you need to do age verification for the participants, right? So we had a blockchain-based age verification system as a POC that we did live at a conference. It obviously was a huge hit. If you get free beer, I'm quite sure a lot of people were interested, but we proved that out. But at the end of the day, it didn't really require a blockchain, and so we would probably do something with a different technology at the back end, but that was something a couple of years back, as I said, when blockchain was really hot, and we wanted to really bring in the concept of underage drinking and preventing that and how we are working through some of those issues.
Yeah, so we mentioned kind of the trust your supplier, but another one that we worked in was in oil and gas, and this was with Paperchain Labs. And they developed a ticketing system for the oil industry where oil barrels amongst competitors that needed to be shipped to one another from inception, from when they were first filled to when they were shipped to how they got cleaned to how they were returned, were all put on the blockchain network. And one of the big things here was, first, it helps reduce friction in the procurement process. It helps competitors cooperate with one another because everything's posted to the blockchain. So they developed this ticketing network where everything's put to the blockchain, where it was very easy for everybody to get buy-in because everybody wanted that visibility ahead of time. It was a outstanding problem that continued to grow in pain, and it was something that we were a part of to help validate the trust, verify the transactions as they enacted, so that transactions could occur very seamlessly. New actors could get added to the network very easily. Their identity was verified, and we didn't run into those redundancy issues of, okay, we need to onboard another supplier and ask them the same question for the millionth time for every single vendor. So it really sped up the process and the cost of resources and overhead overall.
Well, let me see. Aerospace industry and blockchain. I guess one of the easiest ways to explain a proof of concept that we evaluated and found successful was a term used, part provenance. Within the aviation industry or aerospace industry, all the parts that go into an airplane have to be registered, certified, and tracked over the life cycle of the part. And so we identified a part, what's referred to as a rotable, which means that it's initially installed on the aircraft. Well, let's just use the braking mechanism on the aircraft. That's what's utilized when the airplane needs to come to a stop after it's landed. It's a very important part. After so many cycles, or how many landings, and over a period of time, that part has to come off the airplane, a new part's put on, or a recertified part goes back on the airplane so you can continue to operate the aircraft. And so we use that as a model for proof of concept. We call it rotable part provenance for commercial airplane. And the first thing we assumed that we understood the process. And we understood it from a perspective of Boeing's involvement with the part, but we didn't understand it from a perspective of the supplier, the owner, and the operator of the aircraft. And so we had to expand our definition of the process beyond what we originally thought our intent was. And so that required us to extend our process model to include the owner, the operator, the original part manufacturer, and the regulatory authority, because the process of demonstrating to the regulatory authority that you are in compliance with the maintenance requirements or schedule for the brake system needed to be demonstrated, because they would do scheduled checks, and they would do surprise visits to an airline to make sure that the paperwork was properly in place. And so one thing we initially came across was, one, we didn't understand the complete life cycle of the process. So we had to refine that and get that in place. And then we looked at the applicability of the technology and looked at the value proposition of using blockchain associated with the defined process once we came to understanding what that was. We quickly realized that in the aviation industry, it's primarily a paper-based system. And so it's the responsibility of the participant to maintain the efficacy of the paper associated with the work that was done and the traceability of the part. So the part has traceability that goes with the part. The organization or the entity that utilizes the part, either installing and replacing or repairing or recertifying it, also has to keep a record of the work that they did associated with the part. So you have entities that keep track of the work that was done, and you have the part that has a history of the part paperwork that has to go with the part. Right? So there's a traveling paper, let's just call it that, traveling paper that goes with that. So it became a very complex system that is fraught with missing paperwork, ineligible writing from a person who's writing the information down about what occurred with the part. Right? So this is an ideal opportunity for a distributed ledger, shared distributed blockchain opportunity. So we actually partnered with one of our strategic IT partners who came in, who's well known in the industry, that uses Hyperledger as a core for their solution. And we actually built a working model utilizing we didn't use the brake system in this example internally with the Boeing, but we found out that the technology actually works. And it's mature enough to be utilized. Now that was 3 years ago, and there's been significant improvements in the technology over the last couple of years. But we found that blockchain technology is a viable solution to traceability of part information across multiple participants, both for the part traceability and to assist the organizations that have a responsibility of tracking who did what, when, information within those respective organizations, and sharing that information within the ecosystem. So it worked. And so now the challenge is getting agreement of the value proposition that would motivate the participation and the utilization of a distributed blockchain solution for port provenance in commercial aviation.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, within Modex we have a lot of use cases that we like, but we have a lot of use cases that we really love. The ones that we really love are in the healthcare industry, where we are piloting now a project for the mother and child program, in the sense that if you go with your child to a hospital in real time, you need access to the medical information of the child. And if you're traveling, or there's no communication system between hospitals and emergency rooms, so that's something that we're piloting, and it works. It's an absolutely interesting project for us. The other one is with the ransomware protection for hospitals, where it's a matter of life and death also. We have other projects in electronic medical records. And the ones that we like are in the financial industry, where we work closely with one of the European regulators for financial reporting, in the sense that they spend a lot of time and money in verifying the information that are being sent to them once per month by, I don't know, trading companies, banks, insurance companies, the ones that report to a regulator. And in this case with our infrastructure, by installing a node, we have a partial node infrastructure that you just install, and automatically all the data is caught in real time by the regulator. So the regulator is the central point of reporting of the data. So it's absolutely impossible to commit fraud. Cooking the books in the financial industry becomes like impossible, because you need a reason for the change of that specific record. And we have also interesting pilots in the banking sector, where we're taking one of the most used core banking systems in the world, and we're implementing a blockchain database infrastructure in the backend to increase the speed of transactions and to allow traceability on all of the systems. So various use cases. We all start from a very versatile technology, which is extremely light on blockchain. We're not a protocol, and we're not a blockchain. We just use other players, so we're database agnostic and protocol agnostic, and we want to empower the CTOs. And very interesting, another thing also for the aviation industry, we're looking on a dynamic pricing model, in the sense that, for example, I want to fly tomorrow to Seattle. I push my bid of $50. The company does not see who's the guy that pushed the offer, but he can accept the offer of $50. We're piloting that in the aviation industry and in the hotel industry. So technically, when the hotel or the airline accepts that, automatically the transaction is triggered, so automatically you might get a deal or not. So dynamic pricing is an interesting area that we pilot with some hotel chains and airlines.
It's sort of a reverse bidding.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
We should have a chat.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
Yeah, this is interesting. This is very similar to what some folks are experimenting with in my industry in energy, and looking at ways to sell power and services into the grid through this kind of reverse auction mechanism. And of course, that looks a lot more like the kind of fintech applications of blockchain that people are more familiar with. Great. I want to make sure we set aside some time for Q&A here. I think we're perfect. I think we're running through Slido. So if you haven't already, submit your questions through that app. I'm going to ask one more question out here while you guys put down some questions that you'd like us to answer up here, and then we'll get to those questions. The last one is really kind of the money question, which is, once you've got this POC, you've got all your ingredients, you've got it implemented, you've got the right stakeholders, you've done your due diligence, how do you move from POC to a commercial product? And what do you need to support that commercial product down the line?
Sure. So I think one of the things with blockchain is it really requires a commitment to three things: is the reliability of your network, security, and ensuring that you're compliant with whatever frameworks your industry might be in. And a lot of this is going to come from not only your pre-planning, but what happens in a post-production world. Are we monitoring our network? Are we ready to scale? Because very quickly your network can scale up. And one of the things that people talk about with blockchain, whether you're in public or you're in private, is the scalability issue of it. Are we allowed to post our transactions to the blockchain in the number of seconds that we need it to? If we have an outage for 12 hours overnight while we're not being notified of anything that's going on, we're going to lose out an incredible sum of money. It's going to look very bad from an emerging technology standpoint, and we're going to need to know what we can do to rectify that. So you really need to have continuous monitoring in place from the security perspective, from the network perspective, from the overall health of your operation. So that's going to come from getting internal buy-in from the C-level all the way down. It's going to come to your operations team so that they're aware of what's going on. It's going to come from your security team. How are we architected? Are there compliance frameworks that we need to adhere to, especially as we add new infrastructure to it? There's a lot of things to take into consideration when you're going to be moving to production, and it's going to be much easier for you to get buy-in if you've done the legwork to understand, okay, it's not just about proving the viability of it, that we've conceptualized this idea that is going to work for the use case we have. Now it's going to come to the post-production world. How are we going to ensure that this works the way that it's intended to for an ongoing basis? Because with an immutable ledger in some way, it's very scary at the same time. I mean, things can be amended later on, but that initial, if there's malicious activity and somebody changes a smart contract and bad actors are added to your network and there's bad transactions getting posted to your network, that is a very scary thing to amend. You're gonna have to go back through, going through logs, going through the change management of your security architecture. You're gonna have to go through all of that, which costs a lot of money. So it's good to have those very proactively, put that in place ahead of time before something happens. And that would be, my recommendation for people who are trying to move it to production, is to start thinking about post-production world, not just how do I get it to production.
So I just want to ask a few questions about that.
Sure.
Where I work at Boeing, we have a pre-existing information security organization. We have a network organization. We have a database or information management organization. When we go to introduce blockchain into a production environment, those organizations are already there. They're already evaluating those concerns that you raise. And I think that's true for every organization that's been in business for a while, that's gone through this digital evolution over the last 20 years. So my question to you is, have you come across a company that doesn't have that capability in place, where it needs to be matured rapidly in order to use blockchain effectively?
Yeah, we certainly have seen that before, where people have been thinking about proof of concepts, but they've been thinking in a very siloed, not a holistic view of the entire organization, where they haven't been moving it through the right security checks.
Well, that's good, because whenever we try to do it without going through the proper organizations, they find us.
Right.
Awesome. Well, it looks like thanks folks for pulling up those questions on the board. So let's go from the bottom up here. How many years until blockchain is as pervasive as cloud for industrial and manufacturing market? Maybe the way to do this would be like 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 10 years plus.
Well, I think it's available now.
It's available
months.
now?
If you don't think it's now, it'll be ready before, mid-year next year. There's companies that are out there that are, the Microsoft, Amazons, Oracles, IBMs of the world, and now they've stood up their blockchain as a services, right? And they're valuable. So.
But in terms of as pervasive as cloud, and so I guess the way I read that is how long until blockchain becomes something that every company thinks they need to have, as opposed to something that every company can have.
That's gonna take years, right? Because you have legacy issues that you're dealing with. You can't. Where do I put it? How do I get it incorporated into my existing product line, or is it like it's shown here? Is it a standalone implementation, right? So it could be months or years depending on where you're at. So.
Yeah, I would still say that you have a couple of years. I think you're seeing it more readily available to people for the use cases that you need, but I still think there's an evolution of things where those use cases need to be fleshed out a little bit more, and people really need to take that foot in the water to make sure it's warm for everybody else.
Yeah, I also agree with that. I think a couple of years, because the big players are already offering blockchain infrastructures, and the key to adoption would be when you go to their marketplaces and you just select, you want a normal infrastructure or you want the blockchain based or a blockchain database infrastructure on top of what you're buying from them. So.
Yeah, I also think it will take some time, and because right now, as everybody mentioned, it is more available as an infrastructure as a service. I think if you look at where is adoption really fast, when it's more like a software as a service, right? Where all the use cases, everything is packaged together. and people can just go and adopt, right? I don't think, in most cases, it doesn't exist. So till we see that point, I think adoption will be slow.
Great. Okay. So where are we? Okay. So, Mihai, in what way does Modex make it cheaper for CTOs to implement blockchain solutions, and what are the major cost barriers that exist today?
Yeah, well, coming back to what you said earlier, it's exactly that. Blockchain should be offered as a service, but the full infrastructure, not just the back-end layer. I mean, now if you go to Amazon and you want to build an application on top of blockchain, you still need a blockchain development team. That CTO over there needs to be trained to know how to operate on those systems. While our thesis with the Modex was like, you know what, as a CTO, you just need to know how you structure your own database. Blockchain should be offered as a service in the backend, should be a blockchain backend as a service in that case. So technically you keep your application layer and you keep your own data infrastructure, and in the backend you just connect to something like that. So what we do is we empower CTOs, because there are economical reasons but also political reasons. No CTO, we were a consulting company before, and we sacrificed our business model because we realized that we don't need to go out there and make CTOs feel bad because they don't know Hyperledger or they don't know the latest technology from Amazon. We just want to empower them in the sense that we want them to be the ones that implement blockchain within that organization without spending time on consulting companies or blockchain development companies, because all these companies using it today, they are in the business of using a piece of blockchain, not owning it. So until now, the concept was like, why don't we come and build you a fancy protocol or a private network within your organization? That's good for the top 0.1% of the companies, but the other ones are looking at all of those costs and they cannot afford something like this. So what we do is we offer it as a service. It's a very simple model, costs tens of dollars per month. You just pay for what you write in the infrastructure. So I think this is a good way for them to enter de-risk in the field.
Thank you. Good stuff. Okay, so Robert, you got a couple up here. Let's go with the top voted one here. What's your biggest challenge while building a viability use case on blockchain?
Well, I was thinking of whether to answer this from a technological perspective or from a business perspective. But I think the biggest challenge is from a business perspective. We have pre-existing relationship with the airlines, pre-existing relationships with the regulatory authority. The introduction, the introduction of the technology, of blockchain, changes the relationship regarding information sharing in industry. So if you have pre-existing contractual relationships of how you engage one another and you need to change those terms, think about the organizations and individuals that have to review and approve those changes. So that's a huge consideration. That's a significant consideration that you have to pay attention to. So once you get over that hurdle, then you're addressing what type of information are we going to share, and how is that information, how can you ensure that information is utilized with the intent of why we're sharing it. And that's a big concern we have. All of the participants have in a more open ecosystem, in a private open, I don't know if that's the right word, a private open distributed ledger technology arena. So those are the big challenges. Getting through your changes to your existing relationships, because everybody's involved in that, and then how do everybody agree and abide by the use of information.
Great. I like the second question from the top too, and maybe this is a good one to end on. Not all blockchain use cases sort of extend out of the digital realm into the physical realm, but Robert, your example of tracking parts, which are obviously not digital objects in themselves, how do you take into account that bridge between the physical
that's a very good question. That's a question. Whether we're using blockchain or not using blockchain, that question is a very good question. How do you know that part is a properly certified part that you're putting on that aircraft? How do you know, right? Today we rely on the paper. the paper trail that goes with the part. And sometimes it's not as accurate as you'd like it to be, right? For a number of reasons, and we won't have time to get into that. So this is what's interesting about blockchain. Blockchain standing alone, it does not maximize the value of the opportunity. You have to associate it with other technology. This is where the Internet of Things and other technology that we have available that is now, we're able to identify that part in ways that it's very difficult to either, obfuscate what that part is or to imply that technology on the part without having access to the technology. So we can put encrypted information embedded into the part that can be scanned, recognized, and otherwise things that are associated with that. So it's an evolution of emerging technology associated with that problem where it's more than just blockchain addressing the problem. So, or creating a better opportunity for all of us. So.
Well, thank you all for coming. Let's get a hand for the great panelists up here. We'd encourage you to track them down and ask them more questions at the networking events we'll get later on today. Thanks, Robert, and everyone on the panel.
Hi. Thanks, guys. So we're going to have a moment of transition.